Hello, it's nice to see you again. Up until the last session, from video 33 to video 41, over the course of 9 episodes, I explained how to create a transition plan for adulthood. The reason I spent such a long time explaining this is because I believe it is that important. Although I refer to it as adulthood, I want to emphasize that it is highly recommended to start making these plans from a very young age. However, while putting these plans into practice is just as important as making them, it is also important to be careful not to apply them too rigidly. These are plans and actions intended for your child's happy life, so you must be careful not to let them become a means for parents to impose their own desires or take control over their child. Depending on the circumstances and your child's situation, the plans can always be adjusted as needed. Today, through conversations with parents preparing for their children's adulthood, we had a Q&A session covering many topics. But there were some additional questions that parents asked after the seminar. I would like to take a moment to briefly answer those questions. When categorizing the questions you asked, they generally fall into about 4 main categories. The first is the question of what government support is available when they become adults. The second category includes questions about support for people with disabilities when entering university, as well as questions about employment after graduation. The third category concerns questions about what career paths to pursue if they do not go to university. The fourth category is about issues that arise during adulthood. So, you have given questions in these 4 categories. So first, let's look at the questions about government support, which is the first category. The question is as follows. How does the process work for a child with autism spectrum disorder to transition from MCFD to PWD? And what should we prepare in advance? That was the question. To answer, you mentioned transitioning from MCFD to PWD, but to be precise, it would be more accurate to say transitioning from MCFD to CLBC. Of course, PWD is also related. PWD refers to the disability assistance that a child with a disability receives when they turn 18. PWD is managed by the MSTPR, which is similar to the Ministry of Health and Welfare in Korea. Support is provided through such agencies, but if you want your child to start receiving it from the month they turn 18, you must apply no later than when your child is 17 and a half years old. Retroactive payments are not possible, so if you apply late, you will not receive the amount for the delayed period. I will explain more detailed information about PWD in a separate video later on. When your child turns 19, they will no longer receive services from MCFD, but instead will be supported by CLBC, which stands for Community Living BC, an agency that supports adults with developmental disabilities aged 19 and older. The main services include respite, day programs, and home share programs. I have briefly explained CLBC services in the BoTV video number 14. I will provide more detailed information in a separate video in the future. Being registered with MCFD most likely means that you are receiving autism funding or respite funding. If your child is already registered with MCFD when your child turns 16, please contact the MCFD first and request that your child's file be transferred to CLBC. Since the process takes quite a bit of time, I recommend communicating with MCFD in advance. If you are not registered with MCFD, you will need to go through a separate registration process with CLBC. CLBC services are also only available after registration, and since the registration process takes a long time, please make sure to apply for registration in advance. Now, moving on to the second category, which is questions related to university support. So here's the question. What kinds of support and financial assistance are available for children with autism spectrum disorder when they enter university? To briefly explain university support, the main form of assistance is the various grants for people with disabilities provided by Student Aid BC. One of these is the Canada Student Grant for persons with permanent disabilities, abbreviated as CSGPD, which, as of 2024, provides up to $2,800 per year. It seems that this amount changes from time to time. When my child was attending university around 2015, it was $2,000 per year, but a couple of years ago, there was even a time when up to $4,000 was provided. In addition, they also support costs for tutors and the purchase of necessary equipment. In my child's case, since they were in the animation department, the tuition was about 3 times higher than other departments. Back in 2015, if the annual tuition for regular departments was about $5,000, Capilano's animation department was around $15,000. Personally, we did pay a bit more in tuition, but with the disability tuition support mentioned above, as well as loans and bursaries, the financial burden wasn't that heavy. And as for the loan, after graduation, you have to pay it back if you get a job and your income exceeds a certain level. But if not, a portion of it is forgiven each year. In conclusion, when deciding whether to go to college, you can think of it as the cost not having a particularly big impact on your decision. I'll also introduce more details about applying to this university in a separate video. Here is the third question. Most Korean parents struggle with the choice between college and employment. What should they focus on when making this decision? While it's important to respect and follow the child's wishes, most parents still question whether their autistic child's decision is the right one. Now, here's how I would answer this question. If your child wants to go to college, this question isn't actually that difficult. You just need to provide good support. The real issue arises when the child doesn't want to go to college, but the parents think they should send their child to college anyway. In this case, this question becomes very difficult to answer. It's hard to say that there's a right answer. In situations like this, what I'd like to suggest is that parents should ask themselves why they want to send their child to college when the child doesn't want to go, and try to answer that question honestly. Is college for the sake of someone in particular? Is it for your child, or is it for yourself as a parent? Is it perhaps because you feel embarrassed that your child might not attend college? Or do you genuinely think it would be good for your child to experience college life? Are you doing this because you think so? Is it because you think they need a college degree to get a job? If you were to get a job, what field would you like to work in? Is it really necessary to graduate from college in order to get a job? There are countless questions, such as whether graduating from college will actually lead to employment, and I encourage you to try writing out your answers to these questions yourself. The next related question is as follows. This would be the fourth question. When preparing for employment after graduating from college, what aspects should be considered for children with autism spectrum disorder? This was the question asked. I will talk about employment in a separate video later. But for now, based on my experience, graduating from college does not necessarily guarantee a job. If the skills learned in college are outstanding, the chances of getting a job are certainly higher. But getting a job is not just about having job-related skills. Relationships with others and communication are just as important. Unless it's a specialized profession, communication and relationship building skills are actually much more important than technical skills. And while getting into college is a one-sided game where if we work hard and decide to enter, we can get in, employment is a game with an opponent. If the employer doesn't hire you, you can't get the job. So the rules of the game are completely different. That's why it's even more difficult. Perhaps communication and relationship building skills are even more important than getting into college. Now, moving on to the third category. What career paths are available if one does not go to college? That's the question here. If your child does not go on to college, there are generally two main career paths to consider. One is to enter a job training program or to seek employment directly. The other is to receive services supported by CLBC, which I mentioned earlier. First, the job training programs are overseen by the Ministry of Advanced Education, which is essentially the Ministry of Education. These are adult special education programs offered at certain colleges under their supervision. These programs mainly provide training related to employment, vocational skills, academic skills, and personal success skills. Now, what does it mean to seek employment? There is a government agency called WorkBC that supports employment. Alternatively, you can receive employment support through CLBC's employment agencies. I will also share my experiences and thoughts on this topic in a separate video. The second option is to join a program supported by CLBC. This is commonly referred to as a day program, but the official name here is CI, which stands for Community Inclusion Program. Depending on the funding you receive from CLBC, some people attend for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Others may only attend a few days a week. For more detailed information about this, I will explain in a separate video introducing CLBC services. Additionally, there is another program called Steps Forward. This program does not involve formal admission to a university, but rather allows participants to audit classes at the same university. In other words, it is a program specifically designed for people with disabilities who wish to experience university life. I will also introduce the Steps Forward program in a separate video. If it's not one of the three options mentioned above, then most likely people will just stay at home or live their own lives individually. Now, onto the fourth category. This is a question about the problems that arise when becoming an adult. The question is as follows. What are the concerns for our children with autism spectrum disorder as they transition into adulthood? This is closely related to the answers I mentioned earlier. And we have discussed this several times in various videos. Since I don't know every situation, if I speak only from my own experience, I would say that, in the end, relationships and social skills are extremely important. Up until high school graduation, there is the framework and daily life provided by school, but once you graduate from high school, that framework disappears. If you go to college, then college will serve as a framework for a few more years. But after you graduate, it's the same situation. Whether it's after high school or after college, as long as you get a job and get along well with your coworkers, there shouldn't be any problems. However, if you can't find a job, or if you get a job and then quit and you don't have any friends or belong to any other religious or social groups, there are many situations where you end up being alone. But we can't necessarily say that this is always a problem. After all, there are quite a few people who do just fine on their own. Also, parents might think that there's nothing wrong with that. The issue is that even if their child is doing fine alone, there are often cases where the parents find it difficult. When a child is alone, conflicts can arise with their parents, and the child themselves may also find such situations difficult. So in the end, whether they're alone or not, I just hope that the child or the parent can enjoy the everyday pleasures of life. But if that's not the case, I believe it's important for our children to belong somewhere. That could be a university, a workplace, or if not those, perhaps a group of friends, a church, or another religious group. Like this, although not everything can be prepared 100% perfectly for these kinds of issues, I hope that knowing about them in advance can help you get ready ahead of time. Today, I gave a brief answer like this, but as I mentioned earlier, I will take time to introduce each of these issues in more detail through separate videos. That's all for today. Next time, I'll be back with another topic. Thank you for watching.